I was sitting at my desk, exhausted after another 12-hour shift, when my phone vibrated. It was a message from my younger brother, Matteo. "Hey bro, just wanted to let you know. Don't worry about coming to the wedding. It's a pretty formal event and we're keeping the guest list very small. No hard feelings, right?" No hard feelings. I paid for the entire venue, the catering, the band, the decorations, even the wedding dress. It wasn't even my idea, I never offered. But my parents made me feel guilty. "You're the older, successful brother. It's your responsibility to help the family." And like a fool I did. And now, after I'd spent all my savings, they had the nerve to tell me I wasn't even invited. I felt my chest tighten and my fingers tremble as I reread the message. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was a joke. I called Matteo. He didn't answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. My heart pounded in my ears. This couldn't be real. I took a deep breath and dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring with her usual sweet voice. "Oh, darling, I was just thinking about you." I forced myself to stay calm. "Mom, what's going on with Matteo's wedding?" Silence, then a sigh. "Oh, love, don't be like that, okay? It's just that, well, Matteo and Camila want a very elegant atmosphere, and they're trying to keep the guest list very curated." Curated. As if I were some kind of embarrassment they had to filter out of their perfect little fairy tale. I clenched my fist so tightly my nails dug into my palm. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "I paid for the entire wedding, but I'm not good enough to attend?" "Oh, darling, don't be so dramatic," my mother said reproachfully. "You know how these things are. It's not personal. It's just that Camila's family is very particular about the type of guests." "The type of guests?" My voice rose. "What does that even mean?" She clicked her tongue and replied softly. "Well, you work so much and you never really interact with their circle. It's just..." I couldn't listen anymore. I hung up the phone. I gripped my mobile so hard I thought I might break it. My whole life I'd sacrificed for my family. I was always the responsible one, the reliable one. And this was my reward. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. No. This would be the last time they used me. I should have seen it coming. This wasn't the first time my family had used me. It was just the biggest betrayal. Since I was a kid, my parents had taught me a single lesson. Family comes first. But what they really meant was, you will sacrifice everything so we don't have to. Matteo was always the golden child, the charming one, the funny one. The one who, according to my parents, was destined for greatness. And me? I was the workhorse, the dependable one, the one who had to be responsible while Matteo sailed through life without consequences. When we were kids, I had to share everything with him. If I got a new toy, Matteo would cry until he got it. If I was served a bigger piece of cake, my mother would cut it in half and give the rest to Matteo. "He's your younger brother," she'd tell me. "You have to take care of him." And I did. I gave him everything. In school, when Matteo got into trouble for not doing his homework, my mother would beg me to help him. That turned into doing his homework for him. When he grew up and blew all his money on partying, my parents told me to lend him some. That turned into paying his rent for a whole year. When he dropped out of college and couldn't find a job, they asked me to let him stay with me. Just for a few months. That turned into 2 years. And I let it happen. I let them turn me into their safety net, their personal ATM, their problem solver. Because every time I tried to say enough, I got the same response. "But he's your brother." They always disguised it as my duty, my responsibility, my burden to bear. And then Matteo met Camila, and suddenly, everything revolved around the wedding. My parents were thrilled. Finally, their golden boy was doing something right. They started planning the event as if it were a royal wedding. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime moment," my mother would sigh. "We have to make it special." And when she said we, she really meant you. First it was small things. They asked if I could cover the deposit for the wedding venue. "It's just a little help," my father assured me. Then it was the catering. "You know Matteo doesn't have a stable job right now." Then the photographer, the flowers, the decorations. Every request followed the same pattern. Guilt, pressure, obligation. "You're the older brother. You have a good job. It's only fair you contribute." And I did. I told myself it was okay, that it was only money, that helping my family was the right thing to do. But the more I gave, the more they expected. My parents never once suggested that Mateo contribute anything. He and Camila just kept adding things to the list, assuming I would take care of it. And I did. Until I found out I wasn't even invited. That night, sitting in my apartment, staring at my phone, I reread Mateo's message again and again. And something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about all the times they'd taken me for granted, for every sacrifice I made, for every euro I handed over, for every time I put my life on hold for them. For what? So they could discard me the moment I was no longer of service? So they could pretend I didn't exist when I was no longer useful? I clenched my fists, my heart pounding with fury. No, not this time. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind churning. I replayed every time my family had used me, every time I put them first, every time I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing, that family should help each other. And every time they repaid me with more demands. By morning, my rage had hardened into something cold and definite. I wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and enthusiastic. "Oh, darling. Are you excited for the big day?" I forced myself to remain calm. "Tell me something, Mom. Why wasn't I invited?" Silence. Then an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, love, don't start with this again. We've already talked about it." "No, you talked. I want an answer." She sighed again, as if dealing with a petulant child. "Darling, it's nothing personal. It's just you work so much and, well, you're not really part of their social circle. It would be awkward." I clenched my jaw. "Awkward? Darling, you know how these things are." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "So let me see if I understand. I was good enough to pay for the wedding, but not good enough to attend." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she said, as if tired of the subject. I gritted my teeth. "Put Dad on." She huffed, but handed him the phone. My father's voice was expectant, impatient. "Look, we don't have time for this nonsense. The wedding is tomorrow. Don't make a scene." I felt my pulse thrumming in my ears. "Dad, tell me the truth. Did you know this? Did you know I wasn't invited?" He exhaled heavily. "Look, Mateo and Camila made their decision. It's their wedding. And you just accepted it? Son, don't be selfish. It's their day." "Selfish? And being honest," he continued, "maybe it's for the best." "The best?" My voice grew tighter. "Why?" He hesitated for an instant. "You have a tendency to." "To what?" I demanded. "Make things more difficult than they need to be." There it was. "You mean I have a tendency to not let you walk all over me? To expect a modicum of respect?" His voice went cold. "You always complicate everything. Just let it go." I laughed, this time louder. "Wow. You really don't see it, do you?" "See what?" He asked, annoyed. "That you've been using me my whole life. Don't be ridiculous." I shook my head. "It's over." Silence. "What did you say?" "That it's over. With all of you. Don't call me again. Don't ask me for any more money. Don't expect anything from me, ever again." Silence. Then my father let out a sarcastic laugh. "Oh, come on. Don't be childish." I didn't respond. "You can't just cut us out." I hung up the phone. I stood there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking with rage. I knew what would come next. They'd call again and again. They'd try to guilt me, manipulate me, convince me that I was the selfish one, that I was destroying the family. But this time I wouldn't listen. This time I was free. For a moment I thought that by hanging up it would end there. That they would understand the message. That they would finally comprehend that I was serious. I was wrong. The storm began at dawn. I woke to the incessant buzzing of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. I blinked open my eyes and saw the illuminated screen. 22 missed calls from my mother. 10 from my father. 3 from Mateo. And over 40 messages. "We need to talk. You're overreacting. Family doesn't treat each other like this. Call me right now. You're embarrassing us." I sighed and without hesitation turned off the phone. Silence. For the first time in years my life was silent. But not for long. Barely an hour later it started. Someone was pounding on my door with fury. It wasn't a simple knock. It was insistent hammering, almost desperate, like they were trying to break it down. My stomach clenched. I lived alone. No one ever came unannounced. With a rising sense of dread, I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. It was my mother. Her face was rigid with rage, her hands clenched into fists. This was not someone coming to talk calmly. I sighed. This wasn't going to be easy. I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. Mom! She didn't give me time to react. With a shove, she burst into my apartment, marching with heavy steps towards the living room. I closed my eyes for a second, breathing deeply. I turned to face her. What is wrong with you? She snapped, whirling to face me. I kept my voice firm and even. Good morning to you too. Don't you take that tone with me. Her eyes blazed with fury. Do you have any idea what you've done? I crossed my arms. Enlighten me. You've humiliated your brother. Her voice cracked in an angry whisper. You've humiliated this family. I stared at her incredulously. I humiliated them? My voice came out quieter than I'd expected, but with a coldness I didn't recognize. You left me out of the wedding after I paid for it. And now you're telling me I'm the embarrassment. My mother crossed her arms, her stance rigid, defiant. You're being dramatic. A dry laugh escaped my lips. Dramatic. I shook my head, feeling the fury simmering inside me. I gave everything to this family. And the second I said no, you treated me like I didn't exist. Her expression shifted just for an instant, but it was enough for me to see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. You're making a scene, she retorted, her voice tight. That's why Mateo didn't want you there. I felt as though I'd been punched in the chest. Sorry. Always making it all about you. And those words were the final blow. My mother's words hit me harder than I'd expected. I felt a tight knot in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't let her see it affect me. No, Mom, I don't make it about me. I do what I do to survive. My voice was low but steady. I've worked myself to the bone so Mateo could live without worry. I've spent years putting all of you first. For what? I saw my mother flinch slightly, but she recovered in an instant. Mateo is your brother. You should support him. I clenched my fists, feeling my nails dig into my skin. And what about me? Her eyes hardened. When has anyone ever supported me? My mother exhaled sharply and looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and weariness. We raised you. We gave you everything. I let out a bitter laugh. You gave me expectations. Her lips tightened into a thin line. That's not love. That's control. The silence between us became heavy, oppressive. Finally, my mother tilted her chin slightly, and her tone turned cold, calculating. Fine, she said, her voice icy calm. If that's how you feel, then you'll have to face the consequences. I narrowed my eyes. What consequences? Her gaze turned sharp. You really think you can just cut us out of your life? Things don't work that way. I took a step closer, lowering my voice to a steady whisper. No, Mom. You're the one who's going to see the consequences. For the first time I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her face. She didn't have the control. Not this time. Get out. She hesitated for a second, but then turned on her heel and strode out of the apartment. I closed the door with a thud and bolted it. Finally it was over. Or so I thought. Because that same night Mateo called. And this time it wasn't to apologize. This time he was calling to destroy me. When his name flashed on the screen I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. I could ignore it. I could block his number. I could pretend he didn't exist. But something inside me whispered no. Answer. End this. So I did. Hello. His voice came sharp and full of rage. What the hell is wrong with you? I leaned against the kitchen counter, gripping the phone tightly. Excuse me. You really just cut Mom and Dad off like that? I exhaled slowly. Yes, Mateo. He let out a dry, scornful laugh. You're completely selfish. I smiled bitterly. Selfish? Yes, he shouted. You abandoned your own family after everything they did for you. I shook my head even though he couldn't see it. After everything they did to me, you mean? Tension filled the line. When he spoke again, his voice was laced with contempt. Don't start with your victim complex. The phone was still pressed to my ear, but But I wasn't really listening to his voice anymore. Mateo's words still echoed in my head, cold and dismissive. You think you're some kind of martyr, he'd sneered. Newsflash, brother. Nobody cares. I clenched my jaw, feeling a burning in my chest. Then why are you calling? Mateo was silent. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew the answer. I smiled wryly, though there was no amusement in it. You need money, don't you? The silence on the other end stretched. Then in a low tone, almost a mumble, Mateo replied, I shouldn't have to ask. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, unable to be contained. My God, you really think you're entitled to it? You're my brother, he retorted, his voice thick with irritation. I shook my head, a mixture of disbelief and fury swirling within me.
No, Mateo.
I was your wallet. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't shame. It wasn't guilt. It was rage. I could hear his rapid breathing, as if he was trying to contain his fury. You're a disappointment. I leaned against the kitchen counter, closing my eyes for an instant. And you, my voice low, steady like a sharpened blade, are a parasite. Another silence. But this time something had shifted. It was denser, darker. Mateo's voice came low, menacing. You're going to see the consequences. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? You'll see. And he hung up. I stared at the phone screen, feeling my pulse quicken. Something wasn't right. And I was about to find out exactly what. First, they were small signs. A declined transaction on my credit card. A strange email from my bank asking if I'd recently changed my address. Details that, at any other time, would have meant nothing. Until a week later I woke up and checked my bank account. Every penny was gone. My breath hitched. No, it couldn't be. I opened the app again and again, hoping it was a mistake, a system glitch. But the number didn't change. Balance €0. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, my mind blank, unable to process it. And then the phone rang. I picked it up with trembling hands. Sir. A woman's voice, a bank representative, sounded professional but with a tinge of caution. We have reason to believe there has been an unauthorized transaction. I swallowed, my throat dry as paper. What do you mean? The funds were transferred to a joint account in your family's name. A dull buzzing filled my head. A joint account. My voice came out in a bare whisper. Yes, sir. The account was previously linked to yours, so technically, it doesn't qualify as theft. I couldn't help but let out an incredulous laugh. So, according to you, my own brother robbed me, and it doesn't qualify as theft? The woman on the other end hesitated. Legally, the funds were accessible to them. No. I closed my eyes tightly, feeling icy fury burning in my chest. I had made a mistake. A huge mistake. I had never removed them from the account. I never imagined they would be capable of this. But they were. They did it. And there was only one place I could go. I dressed quickly, grabbed my keys, and left my apartment, my heart hammering in my ears. I drove at full speed to Calle de los Olivos, where my parents still lived. I barely parked before I was out of the car and striding across their front yard, not bothering to knock. When my mother opened the door, I pushed past her and entered without a word. I heard her gasp behind me. What is the meaning of this? I didn't stop. My gaze scanned the hallway, searching for the one person I wanted to find. Where is he? I asked, my voice glacial. My mother crossed her arms, her face a mask of indignation. You have no right to barge in like this. Where is he? The sound of slow, mocking clapping filled the hallway. From the shadows of the living room, Mateo appeared, a satisfied smirk on his lips. Well. Look who finally decided to pay us a visit. Mateo emerged from the shadows of the hallway, that same mocking smile I'd always hated plastered on his face. Well. Look who finally decided to pay us a visit. My blood boiled. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, all the rage I'd been suppressing for years exploding. I grabbed him by the collar of his shirt and slammed him against the wall hard. Give it back. He didn't even flinch. He just smiled. No, I tightened my grip, feeling my own pulse throbbing in my temples. I swear to God, Mateo, he scoffed, his tone dripping with venom. What are you going to do? Hit me? Go ahead. Prove to mom and dad how bad you are. I froze. That's what he wanted. He wanted me to lose control, to react, to let my fury take over. To make him the victim and me the monster. Slowly, I released his shirt and took a step back. Mateo straightened his clothes calmly, his smile wider than before. Good choice. I turned to my parents. You allowed this? My father shrugged, with the indifference of someone watching rain from a window. You should have been loyal to your family. Something inside me snapped completely. I stepped back, then another step. I looked at them, really looked at them for the first time. They didn't care. They had never cared. And they never would. I let out a long sigh. Fine. Mateo frowned. What? I smiled serenely. I said fine. And I left. Took 2 months. I filed a fraud report. They rejected it. I hired a lawyer. He told me I had a case. So I sued my own family. Of course, Mateo played the victim. He cried on social media, writing melodramatic posts about how money had torn us apart. My parents begged me to let it go. But I didn't. Because this time I wasn't saving them. This time I was saving myself. The trial dragged on for months, but in the end I won. The judge ruled in my favor. Mateo had to pay back every last cent. And when he couldn't, they seized his wedding fund. They repossessed his car. His perfect life crumbled. And my parents called me. They begged. They said they were sorry. I blocked them. And for the first time in my life I was free. It's been a year. A year without calls asking for money. A year without waking up to panicked messages because someone in the family needed help. A year without feeling like my only function in life was to serve others. For the first time I'm free. It wasn't easy cutting ties. It felt like ripping off a part of myself. Because as much as they had hurt me, they were still my family. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing, if I'd been too harsh, if I really was the selfish one they claimed I was. But then I'd remember everything they'd done to me. All the years of manipulation. All the money I'd worked for, vanished into their hands. All the betrayal. And the guilt would fade. All that remained was an overwhelming sense of relief. Mateo disappeared after the trial. He blocked me everywhere. I haven't heard from him since. My parents tried to hold out at first. They were furious. They told everyone in the family that I'd abandoned them, that I was ungrateful, that after everything they'd done for me, this is how I repaid them. But over time the tone shifted. A few weeks ago my mother sent me a message. Son, let's talk. We all make mistakes. You don't want to live with regrets, do you? I stared at the screen for a long time. Regrets? What was I supposed to regret? Regretting that I stopped letting them treat me like an ATM? Regretting that I stopped allowing them to manipulate me? Regretting that I put myself first for the first time in my life? And yet I hesitated. Because as much as I wanted to believe I'd moved on, there was a part of me that still longed for what I'd never had. A real family. A mother who loved me for something other than what I could give her. A father who saw me as something more than a financial backup plan. A brother who actually cared. And a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, wondered, had they changed? I didn't reply. I told myself I needed more time. But a few days later another message arrived. Your father and I miss you. Mateo wants to make amends too. Let's talk. Just once. No expectations. No pressure. I let out a laugh when I read it. No expectations. No pressure. That's what they always said right before they asked me for something. Still, the idea lingered. What if, after all this, they really did want to fix things? What if this was my chance to have the family I'd always wanted? Or what if it was just another trap? I haven't replied yet. I don't know if I will. Because I know how this story ends. If I let them back in, everything will seem fine at first. They'll be nice. They'll be affectionate. They'll tell me they've changed. And then one day I'll get a message. Hey, we're having a tough time with the bills right now. Mateo just needs a little help to get back on his feet. We knew we could count on you. And suddenly I'll be right back where I started. So I ask you, would you give them another chance? Or would you walk away for good?